All right, so Unit 5, compliance. Risk mitigation. So this is something we've talked about a lot. So we're just going to go over some more advanced versions with this. Risk is a situation that involves exposure to some type of danger, a function of threats, consequences of those threats, and the resulting vulnerabilities. Helps in understanding how realistic the chances are that assets will be compromised, referred to as the likelihood of occurrence. An asset is considered any item that has a positive economic value, provides value to the enterprise, cannot be easily replaced without significant investment, forms part of the enterprise's corporate identity. Asset value is the relative worth of the asset, and assets are continually under threat. Now, there's all sorts of, when you talk about the relative worth of an asset, there's all sorts of things that they do from, just like you do with cars. The purchase price is not the worth of an asset. Usually the purchase price, and then there's like replacement prices, and then there's how many years have you had it? There's all sorts of sorry, I was just checking to see if there was a question there. There's all sorts of formulas out there to determine what the relative worth of an asset is. A lot of times you'll see those in like insurance policies. They have tons of different formulas for that. Okay, threat classifications, threat category, description, and examples. So strategic, action that affects the long-term goals of the organization, theft of intellectual property, not pursuing a new opportunity, loss of a major account, competitor entering the market. Those are examples. Compliance, following or not following a regulation or standard. Breach of contract, not responding to the introduction of new laws. Financial, impact of financial decisions or market factors. Increase in interest rates, global financial crises. Operational, events that impact the daily business of the organization. Fire, hazardous chemical spills, or power blackouts. Technical, events that affect information technology systems. Denial of service attacks, SQL injection attacks, viruses, things like that. And then managerial, actions related to the management of the organization, long-term illness of a company president, key employee resigning. So one thing to think about in this, when COVID hit and they had all sorts of people that were out for illnesses, it affected the managerial aspects. So that's just an example from recent. Okay, in which of the following threat classifications would a power blackout be classified? Operational, managerial, technical, strategic. I can go back to the chart if you guys want me to. That was cute. Okay. Operational, good job.
Although if it's big enough, wouldn't it technically be a strategic? Say a blackout hits something like the entire East Coast.
Yeah, if it's bad enough, it could cause some problems with that. It depends on, there's a lot of these can branch over into other threat categories. That is a good point. And it could also be a financial impact as well. Risk types, internal and external. So we've harped on this a lot. Internal risks exist within an organization. External risks exist outside an organization. Legacy systems, read old. A platform well known for its risks, replaced by an updated version. Multi-party, the impact that vulnerabilities of one organization will have on, quote, downstream organizations. Intellectual property theft, the theft of IP by threat actors that may deprive the legitimate business of profits. Notice how they threw legitimate business in there? Software compliance and testing. Specialized software that is used by an enterprise is subject to licensing restrictions. Software compliance and licensing risks are considered a serious problem. Reasons for software non-compliance include licensing software for a specific purpose, but using it for a different purpose, a change in product use rights, the installation of software on a virtual machine. Oh, apparently we're just going to have all the polling activities tonight. Okay, which of the following threats would be classified as the action of a hacktivist? Compliance threat, internal threat, environmental threat, external threat. Okay, yep, good job. A hacktivist would be considered an external threat. Identifying risks. A proper identification of risk is necessary. Not all threats may be risks. Risk identification process. Performing a cyber systems assessment and a business impact analysis. These are also parts of that disaster recovery plan that I was talking about. If you want to do a full-on one, or if you're just going to be doing certain parts for these pieces. I highly suggest, if you want to know more about risk identification, go look at a business impact analysis template and run through it with the business that you work in or the field that you work in. It gives you a lot more ideas of how the stuff works in practical use. Considering the risks associated with a supply chain, and that one, especially after COVID, we have all those, and we are still suffering from supply chain issues. That one is very relevant. Determining risk calculations. Cyber systems assessment. So this is a process for evaluating the cybersecurity protections of a system. Methods used. Penetration testing determines how current configurations of security system controls can be defeated. Vulnerability assessment examines attack paths and system weaknesses according to the severity of results. Security auditing determines if computers and networks are consistent with security policies and best practices. I'm going to add one there. It's just not just computers and networks. There's also the physical security aspect as well. Analytical testing uses formal mathematical methods to verify software. Commonly used metrics that can help in the evaluation of protections. The amount of time required to detect an attack. The response time until the attack can be neutralized. The time required to recover from a successful attack by using redundant systems or compensatory measures. The extent of the damage that limits the ability of the system to perform standard processes. The total time to recovery from an attack. Business impact analysis involves the following: identifying business processes and functions, quantifying the impact that a loss of functions may have on business operations. Impacts include those on property, tangible assets, financial, monetary funding, safety, physical protection, reputation, status, life, well-being. Designed to identify processes that are critical to an enterprise. Helps determine the mission essential function or activity that serves as the core purpose of an enterprise. There are a lot of workplaces that have more than one mission essential function. So don't be surprised if you have multiples when you do one of those. But sometimes when you look at them, they all boil down to one thing in the end. Supply chain assessment. Reducing the risk of supply chain infection can be achieved by evaluating the steps in the chain. The supply chain, a network that moves a product from the supplier to the customer. It comprises vendors, manufacturers, warehouses, distribution centers, and retailers. Many components in the network are not closely monitored. This increases the risk for supply chain infections, the injection of malware into products during manufacturing or storage. Supply chain infections may occur with either software or hardware. Vendor due diligence steps purchasers take to verify suppliers from whom they are purchasing hardware or software. Hardware source authenticity used to verify the hardware components have been purchased from a reputable supplier. Now, I'm going to make a little note here. So when you're doing things with the government, they have gotten significantly harder on supply chain assessment for a good reason. There have been some incidents over the last 10, 15 years of people trying to cheap it on the supply chain. And in so doing, they have bought substandard products, and those substandard products, in a couple of cases, have become pivot points into major secured networks. And we're talking like big.
I have a story that goes with that.
Oh, yes, please.
So when I was back in, I think it was 2012, we had to sweep all of our systems because they had, while I was on active duty, because they had a couple of the contractors had skimped out, and they had ended up, we found out that they had been buying processors and RAM sticks from foreign businesses. So we ended up finding out that a couple of our systems were running Chinese made hardware.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had to tear it apart and find out where all the access points were.
I am not surprised. In fact, the big name cases that I've seen were all, well, not all of them. There were a couple of Russian made software ones that got in there too. But the big ones were China made hardware because they have cheap, fast stuff. So if you're a contractor and you don't mind a little bit of underhanded ways to skim some money off the top, you go out and you buy those cheap products. Well, the problem is a lot of them were either they just flat out were being used as a way for people to get in, or they were so cheap that they never updated anything. There was I want to say it was in the last 2 years that they had the big security cameras that they found on pseudo. I'm not sure if I'm remembering correctly. The website where you can go out and look at basically any security camera out there if it doesn't have the proper stuff. Anyway, Shodan, thank you. Sudo is Linux. Sorry. Too many nerd things mixed together. So yeah, Shodan. And they had like over 150,000 of them from this one vendor that came out of China that just knew there were security holes. They refused to update them. And they were showing up all over the place. So there's that as an example. And there was a whole bunch of like you were talking about components popping up and what should have been secure systems that were not. And then there was another case where they found some Russian-made software on the, I think they were contractors. I think all of these cases were contractors, not internal, like CIA, NSA type things. They were contractors to those. And they were, the people that created the software were based in Russia, which is a big no-no. But they were trying to cheap it and use it anyway. And they found out there was a nice backdoor on all the computers that had this software. So yeah, that's why supply chain is very big now. Nope, knowledge check. Which of the following is not correct about supply chain infection? They can be mitigated by VDD. Supply chain assessment can reduce the risk. They only involve software. A supply chain is often global and more difficult to monitor. Yeet. Cope.
It's not hard. Just assume if it comes out of a country that is communist or was communist at one point, you probably shouldn't trust it.
That's unfortunately, and I don't like to generalize, but unfortunately, that's been the case as of the last 5 years. Okay, so yep, all of you that picked C, it does not only involve software. Risk calculation. 2 approaches to risk calculation. We've talked
Sorry,
about
can I
this
say something real
before.
quick?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
It just popped into my head right after I said that, but at least with capitalism, 9 times out of 10, you can assume that the reason there's errors or issues is because of incompetence, not malicious action.
That's true. It's because someone was trying to make a buck. Okay, so there's qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative uses an educated guess based on observation. Quantitative, hi kitty, uses attempts to create a hard number associated with risk and element in a system by using historical data. Now, the way that I remember anything when you're talking about these is qualitative is quality, quantitative is data-based. That's the easiest way to remember that whenever you're dealing with those 2 words. So quantitative risk calculations can be divided into risk probability, the likelihood that a risk will be exploited with a specific period of time, uses historical data to calculate your risk. Risk magnitude, determined by comparing the impact of the risk to the monetary loss associated with an asset. Then there's the formulas, there's single loss expectancy and annualized loss expectancy. If you want to know those actual formulas, just go type in SLA and ALE and you can find them on Google. Okay, risk register is a nice version of it. Red bad, just remember that. Green good. Orange is warning. Well, it's red's critical, I should say. Orange is you're getting into bad area. Yellow is you might want to look at this before it becomes one of the other colors. And here's our risk matrix. As you can see on the low, you got your green, moderate, significant, catastrophic, and you can see you shift all the way up into the red. Minimizing risk prioritization. So the objective is to create a level of protection that mitigates the vulnerabilities and reduces the potential consequences. Risk prioritization involves the following: making decisions about which risks will be addressed and how they should be controlled, and how this information should be communicated. Identifying strategies that should be applied to risks, dealing with engineering trade-offs, security controls, and communication of risk factors. Okay, give me 1 second. I'm going to pause the recording and I'll be right back with you guys. I've got to grab the vet. Okay, we're resumed. Let me share the screen again. Okay. Let's see. I'm just going to go back to the start on the risk prioritization involves following: making decision about which risks will be addressed and how they should be controlled and how this information should be communicated, identifying strategies that should be applied to risks, dealing with engineering trade-offs, security controls, and communication of risk factors. Risk strategies. Now, these pay attention to, and because every time I have had to explain to someone that there is no elimination 100% of risk, it's been easier to just explain these. So there's acceptance, which you acknowledge the risk without taking steps to address it. Transference, transferring the risk to a third party. So that's like if you have a third party platform or something that'll help take care of whatever it is. Risk avoidance, identify the risk by making the decision not to engage in the activity. So for example, when I worked at the school district and we realized smart speakers, there's a serious risk to these and they record constantly. And we just decided to avoid the risk by not putting smart speakers in the classroom. That was a classic example of risk avoidance. Mitigation, attempting to address the risk by making the risk less serious.
Do they have just plain old risk acceptance on this?
Yeah, on the top. That's when you're just like, meh, I guess I'll just go ahead and deal with it. And a lot of times if they will do that if they consider it something that's a minor risk, and they just figure that it's more expensive. Usually it comes down to money. It's more expensive to provide transference, avoidance, or mitigation than it is to just accept that it's there. However, with cybersecurity being the way it is now, a lot of the time saying, we're just going to accept that risk, just kind of leaves a hole in your security strategy. So you're seeing that less and less. Engineering trade-offs, compromises involved in choosing a risk strategy addressed using system security engineering, security controls, countermeasures that companies implement to detect, prevent, reduce, or counteract security risks. Documenting compensating controls is important. So you remember me talking about how if you don't document things and someone comes in after you, or if you're out sick or many other things, well, you don't know what controls you're using if you don't document them. Communication of risk factors occurs once risks are prioritized. Communication varies according to the audience. So you're not going to tell a business manager who has no IT experience the nitty-gritty details of your risk mitigation. You're just going to give them this is what it is, this is what we're going to do, broad strokes. So keep in mind your audience when you're discussing them. Yes, very nice. Mission complete. That's good. End user training. So this is actually where my teaching started. I've been doing end user training since I got out of high school, and I'm not going to tell you how long that's been, but it's been a long time. End user training raises awareness among users of common risks and how they become a human firewall to help mitigate these risks. Involves understanding what risk exists, their potential impacts, and how they're managed. So when we do social engineering training, that's part of that. Yeah. 407 years. Yes, there were dinosaurs and I rode them to work. No, I'm not that old. Companies comprises the following techniques. Computer-based training, or CBT, uses a computer to deliver instructions. Role-based awareness training involves specialized training customized to specific roles. And gamification utilizes game-based scenarios for instructions. I prefer to do a mix of all three. I have noticed that there are some people that do not do well with gamification. But usually a combination of the first two helps. Yeah, end user training takes a lot of patience. You are correct, Michael. If you can start in any sort of end user training and you become good at it, it is difficult to become good at it. So keep that in mind. Being frustrated is common when you do that. Exercises for cyber teams reduce risk by preparing teams to identify and react to cybersecurity events. Example, in-house pen tests and simulated exercises. So when you have those red team, blue team, purple team exercises, this is what they're talking about. Okay, penetration testing war game teams. What do you know? They beat me to it. Red team, those are the, would you stop leaping on me, Cat? Attackers scan for vulnerabilities and exploit them, has prior in-depth knowledge of existing security, which may provide an unfair advantage. Blue team, they're the defenders, monitor for red team attacks, shore up defenses as necessary, scan log files, traffic analysis, and other data to look for signs of an attack. White team, these are the referees. They enforce the rules of the penetration testing, make notes of the blue team's responses and the red team's attacks. Then there's the purple team, which you're seeing more and more. These are the bridge. Provide real-time feedback between red and blue teams to enhance the testing. Blue team receives information that can be used to prioritize and improve their ability to detect attacks, while red team learns more about technologies and mechanisms used in the defense. Now, there are some really cool red team, blue team, purple team manuals out there. I highly suggest if you see one of those Humble Bundle piles with any of these in it, get it. They've got some good stuff. Incident response exercises. Exercise name, description, and example. Tabletop. Monthly 30-minute discussion of a scenario conducted in an informal and stress-free environment. This scenario is presented. An employee casually remarks about how generous it is of a vendor to provide the box of USB drives on the conference room table embossed with the company logo. After making some inquiries, you find the vendor did not provide the USB drives to employees. What do you do now? So that's just an example of a scenario. Walkthrough, a review by IT personnel of the steps of the plan by paying particular attention to the IT systems and services that may be targeted in the attack. Example, a technician with knowledge of the current system will walk through the proposed recovery procedures to determine if there are omissions, gaps, errors, or false assumptions. Simulation, a hands-on simulation exercise using realistic scenario to thoroughly test each step of the plan. A simulation of a senior vice president who opens a malicious attachment and introduces malware into the network is presented. Nick, did you want to know, are you asking if there's a specific red team, blue team, like channel for certain things? Okay, no. The one that I've put, I think, yeah, I've seen some that explain what they are, but I'm not sure if they're, let me look. I'm sure that they have them out there. I've seen some where they have like news programs that show them, but let me look and see if I can find something better. Computer File might have something. I've linked a bunch of their stuff, and they're one of those for nerds, by nerds type ones. So they're really good. Risk-based controls. Security control, a safeguard or countermeasure employed within an organizational information system. Protects the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of technology system and its data. Categories, managerial, controls that use administrative methods. Operational, controls that, controls implemented and executed by people. Technical, controls incorporated as part of hardware, software, or firmware. Controls found within the categories. Deterrent control, attempts to discourage security violations before they occur. Preventative, works to prevent the threat from coming in contact with the vulnerability. Physical, implements security in a defined structure and location. Detective, designed to identify any threat that has reached the system. Compensating, provides an alternative to normal controls that for some reason cannot be used. Corrective, intended to mitigate or lessen damage caused by the incident. Policies and procedures, terms used to describe the rules for an organization. Standard is a collection of requirements specific to the system or a procedure that must be met by everyone. A guideline is a collection of suggestions that must be implemented. A policy is a document that outlines specific requirements or rules that must be met. A procedure, and remember, there's a difference between a policy and a procedure. I know it might seem to go without saying, but I've seen test questions on this. So a procedure is the step-by-step implementation of the policy. Characteristics and objectives. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say that's why they always call them policies and procedures, because procedures are just what you implement.
Yep. But I've had to explain that to a lot more people than I thought was possible. So that's why I always say they're different. So, yep. Characteristics communicates a consensus of judgment, defines appropriate behavior for users, identifies what tools and procedures are needed, provides directives for human resource actions in response to inappropriate behavior, may be helpful if it is necessary to prosecute violators. A cybersecurity policy serves the following functions: provides overall intention and direction of an organization, details specific risks and how to address them, helps create a security-aware organizational culture, helps ensure that employee behavior is directed and monitored in compliance with security requirements. Now, I'm going to add something here. One of the biggest blocks to learning that I have found in an organization is the employee culture. If you have an employee culture where people refuse to learn security, or they just feel like it's an inconvenience, a lot of times culture flows from the top, as they say. So if you have managers at the top that are saying and doing these things that make it seem like cybersecurity and cybersecurity implementation is not important, it affects the rest of the organization, and it becomes much, much more difficult to train the employees. So one of the things that I always made a point of telling people when I was training them was, you really have to change your culture in your environment about how you talk about cybersecurity training. Because if you're like, oh, this is terrible, it gets this bad reputation, and then people refuse to do it. And when they refuse to do it, you have severe social engineering incidents and things like that. So
one of the huge issues we'd find in the Army was that when people would be talked to about cybersecurity, they would assume because you were talking about cybersecurity, it was the S6's job to deal with it, not theirs. Therefore, they were just trying to get them to do their work for them.
yes, and that is another problem. A lot of times when it comes to cybersecurity and social engineering, they're like, oh, well, that doesn't have anything to do with me. And something that we as cybersecurity professionals have had to knock into people's heads over and over and over again is, no, it's for everyone. Because if you don't have everyone trained, then how are you going to prevent social engineering on all different levels? You can't. You absolutely can't. Okay, components of cybersecurity policies. These are just usual policies that you'll run into that have to deal with it. There's the password policy, addresses how passwords are created and managed. I will tell you, when I first created an official password policy, and then I told them, I'm sorry, 8 characters is not a good minimum, I got a lot of feedback that was very nasty. But once I started teaching classes and showing clips of how fast an 8-character password could be broken, it was a lot easier to get them to change. Account management policy creates a standard for the administration of computing accounts. Acceptable use policy, or AUP, defines the actions users may perform while accessing devices and networks belonging to the organization. Data retention policy outlines how to maintain information in the user's possession for a predetermined length of time. Now, a lot of data retention policies have a local, state, and federal law behind them on how long they have to be maintained. Data ownership policy defines the duties of a data custodian and data owner. The data custodian, the employee responsible for day-to-day maintenance of a set of data. Data owner is the manager responsible for the business functions supported by the data. Code of conduct and ethics policy. Now, I have yet to work somewhere where I have not seen this. Outlines expectations regarding employees' behavior toward their colleagues, supervisors, customers, and other constituents. And now you'll see a code of conduct and ethics policy specifically dealing with technological use. I've seen that in most places I work now, especially when it comes to social media. Continuous monitoring policy defines how the organization may monitor its employees. Work product retention policy outlines who owns the material produced by an employee in the course of his or her work. Yeah, I actually, when you're talking about 16, I made them go to 16 characters. They were very angry at me, but they also refused to do dual authentication. So I said, if you're not going to do dual authentication, we're going to have a 16 character minimum, and that's just that. So it was bad. It was I gave them a minimum of 16. I'm hoping they'll eventually do a mandatory dual authentication, but trying to get them to do dual auth was like pulling teeth. So it was one of the most frustrating parts of that job, and I do not envy anyone having to do that. All right, another knowledge check. What does a work product retention policy address? How long a document of work must be retained before it can be destroyed? What the approved methods are for storing a document, who owns the material produced by an employee, where a document can be stored. Now, remember, it's the way this one's worded. It's work product retention. That's why it threw you all. Yep, product. It's just because of the way it was worded. Yep. A cybersecurity framework is a series of documented processes used to define policies and procedures for implementation and management of security controls in an enterprise environment. Types, there is a prescriptive framework, which describes specific cybersecurity issues that must be addressed. This is also called a compliance-based framework. Risk-based framework, focused on the management and measurement of risks, provides organizations flexibility to identify their own specific risk profiles and craft necessary controls. I prefer anything that allows more creativity, in my own personal experience. Sources of common frameworks. I have worked a lot with NIST, and NIST has a lot of good work. So National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, cybersecurity frameworks, a set of guidelines to help private companies identify, detect, and respond to cyber attacks. Also include guidelines on preventing and recovering from an attack. They're divided into 3 components. The framework core, which defines activities required to attain different cybersecurity results. Implementation tiers, specify 4 implementation tiers that help organizations identify their level of compliance. Profiles, relate to the current status of the organization's cybersecurity measures and the, quote, roadmaps towards compliance with the NIST cybersecurity framework. Now, NIST does a lot of work with federal and state agencies. So a lot of these work around that. But I like them because while they can be a little bit wordy, they give you a really good roadmap. There's the risk management framework, the RMF, or the cybersecurity framework, CSF. Those are 2 commonly wide used NIST frameworks. Then there's ISO. Now, I will say ISO doesn't just deal with cybersecurity. There are, you know, as you can see, those are the ones that deal with us that are listed out here. But there are, anytime you see, when they're talking about safety materials, you'll see ISO standards on there. That's the International Organization for Standardization. So they create a wide array. The top 3 are the ones that you'll see probably the most: 2700, 2701, and 02. And then there's 27701 and 1000. And you probably don't need to have these memorized, but when I took my master's degree, I had to have them memorized. So if you ever see me twitch when I talk about ISO, that's why. Okay, then there's the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, National Professional Organization for Certified Public Accountants in the United States, creates a series of statements. Sorry, I don't know why, but the cats just all went skitter, skitter, skitter. Creates a series of statements and standards for attestation engagements, system and organization controls, service offerings that CPAs may provide. Center for Internet Security, or CIS, a nonprofit community-driven organization that has created 2 recognized frameworks: CIS controls, used to secure an organization and consists of more than 20 basic and advanced cybersecurity recommendations, and CIS benchmarks, frameworks for protecting 48 different operating systems and application software. Yeah, I think they were trying to do the I'm Speed Racer, you know. I have one cat. It's funny because he's actually my oldest cat, that whenever he wants to play, he'll just run around the house and get everyone else wound up. So it's possible that that's what's going on. Audits and assessments. Assessment. An internal review of security controls that are compared against stated security objectives. Audit, a systematic evaluation of the effectiveness of controls when compared against a state of established criteria. There's compliance audits, which determine if controls are being properly implemented, and regulatory audits, which ensure that controls are aligned to regulations established by outside agencies. Okay, so when I worked for the forensic lab, we did assessments. Most accrediting bodies, like with educational places, have like a 7-year cycle. And that's when the big guns come in and do their big accreditation cycle. Now, in order to do those, you also have to have internal assessments, which were done on the local lab level, because there are 3 main labs. So there's one in Pocatello, Meridian, and Coeur d'Alene. The assessments were just done internally to make sure that we were doing everything as we needed to. Then we did, basically they're like compliance audits, and we would ship people from each lab to other labs, and we would go through and audit all of their stuff to make sure, because you don't want to go for 7 years and go, oops, you know. So it's a good way to go, oh, hey, you know, you might have some problems here. You know, let's take a look at this before we get to our next big audit and end up with some compliance and regulatory issues. I was frequently on the teams that did forensic evidence auditing, because each lab had, there were 3 forensic evidence specialists in Meridian, just because their lab was huge, 2 in Pocatello and 2 in Coeur d'Alene, and we all shifted who went where to do what. So I did 2 audits in Coeur d'Alene, not in Coeur d'Alene, in Meridian, and they had massive amounts of evidence. And when you do one of those, you don't skip. You look at every single thing. So they are very, very stressful. Yeah, it is. Audits make you want to pull your hair out. Even if you're just doing an assessment audit for your own company, it's still stressful. Okay. That's it for this one. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording here.